Today I'm reminded of, people can stay calm when everything is going well. The real test is staying calm when someone else causes a problem, whether it's poor communication or some type of confusion due to poor communication. And then somehow, it makes you feel like it's your responsibility to fix everything. This is where self-control is actually tested, not when life is peaceful. When life is peaceful, everything's, roses and dandy. But when someone brings chaos to your door and expects you to carry it, and if you're not careful, their chaos becomes your chaos. Their bad communication becomes your guilt. Their urgency becomes your emergency. And suddenly your whole mood is ruined by a problem you didn't even create. So, here is how to stay calm when people cause problems. First, you have to understand the problem is not yours. Not every problem is your problem. A lot of people take on everything. Someone has failed to communicate, they feel responsible. Someone else has created a mess, they feel like immediately trying to fix it. But ultimately, there is a big difference between being helpful and being emotionally dragged into someone else's chaos. Sometimes people create problems because they didn't think ahead, and that's on them. Sometimes they don't tell you what they expect, and then act surprised when you didn't magically know. Sometimes they wait until the very last minute or even after the last minute, and then suddenly everything becomes urgent. And when that happens, your job is not to panic. Your job is to stay factual. So number 2, staying factual, not emotional. When people create problems, the easiest thing to do is to react emotionally. You want to argue, you want to defend yourself, you want to send a long message, a long explanation, proving why you are right. But most of the time that just pulls you deeper into the drama. The calmer move is to ultimately stick to the facts. What happened, what were you told, when were you told it, what were you not told, what did you actually do, and that's it. No essays, no emotional spiral, just facts, because facts keep you grounded. Emotion makes you reactive, and that's a big lesson to learn, essentially, knowing how to respond with the facts rather than responding with your emotions. A calm person is much harder to manipulate. In fact, it's almost impossible. So number 3, do not accept fake urgency, because other people's problems, they will act urgent around them and then force you into a state of emergency. And someone else's poor planning does not automatically become your emergency, doesn't automatically become your catastrophe. A lot of people are addicted to urgency. Everything is last minute. Everything is a crisis. But a lot of the time, it only feels urgent because someone else failed to plan. Someone else failed to communicate. Someone else's poor forward thinking created an issue, created chaos. If you keep rescuing people from their lack of organisation, they will keep making their lack of organisation your responsibility. You can be reasonable, you can help out where you deem necessary, where you deem acceptable. You can communicate clearly, but you do not need to absorb every emergency that other people create. Do not carry it home. Number 4, do not carry it home. A lot of people leave a situation physically, but mentally they bring it with them. They get home after a particular situation and they're still replaying it over and over again in their head. Whether it's a bad conversation I had with a friend or with a relation, whatever the situation is, people tend to carry on and drag on the problem, the chaos, for the rest of their day, and it can literally ruin the rest of your day, sometimes days or weeks. Asking yourself things like, what should I have said? Were they annoyed? Or should I message again? Should I explain myself further? And the problem gets second life. It gets a second wave in your own head. It steals your evening. It steals your energy. It steals your training. It steals your productive creativity. It steals your sleep. And the other person might not even be thinking about it anymore, So you have to draw a line in the sand, essentially. The situation gets handled when it needs handling. That's it. And it's easier said than done, I know, but practicing this over time, you will get better at it. There has to be a point where you say, I've dealt with what I can, now I'm moving on. Respond from the person you're trying to become. So this would be number 5, When someone creates problems, your lower self wants to react, There's a book I read called the Chimp Paradox, and he talks about different parts of the brain in that book and all sorts of things. But essentially, the book would refer to the part in which you would like to react with is the chimp. And that's not. I'm not saying no one's a chimp. I'm referring to a book which is called The Chimp Paradox, and essentially emotionally reacting to situations. Your brain wants to snap. It wants to send an angry message. It wants to be reactive. But the better version of you pauses and asks, how do I handle this in a way which I won't regret later? And that question changes everything. Staying calm isn't about pretending you're not annoyed. You might be annoyed, and you can be annoyed. You might know the situation is completely stupid and ridiculous, but you don't let that frustration control your behaviour. You have to feel the emotion, but still choose the response. That is emotional discipline. Every time you respond calmly, you build trust with yourself. You prove that people can be difficult, but you don't have to become difficult with them. You prove that your peace is not for sale. If one message can ruin your day and one difficult person can destroy your mood, your peace is too easy to steal. You need to make it harder to take. You need to slow down, check the facts, respond clearly and cleanly, and move on. Not every situation needs your anger. Not every problem deserves your entire central nervous system. The real win is not proving you're right. The real win is just not letting someone else's chaos pull you into a state of emergency to absolutely wreck your central nervous system. Pulling you away from the life you're trying to build. A reactive person says, they ruined my day. A disciplined person says, that happened, I dealt with it, and I've moved on. Because life will keep giving you difficult people, difficult problems, bad communication, poor planners, chaotic situations, people who make their stresses everyone else's problem. And you're not going to escape that completely unless you go choose to live on a mountain or in a forest far away from civilization. So the goal is to ultimately not find a life where nobody causes problems, because it's unavoidable, it's inextricable. The goal is to become ultimately the kind of person who doesn't collapse every time they do cause problems. You become calm. You become calm by being calm, essentially. You don't become calm by living around calm people. You become calm by not absorbing the chaos that was never yours to carry. And I think that's probably the biggest thing, one of the biggest things you can learn when dealing with chaotic situations. Not every problem deserves your entire central nervous system. And that's that. Thank you very much for watching. This is Jake O'Neill. You've been watching Jake O'Neill UK. Hope to see you in the next one.